Welcome back to Manhwa Unlocked. Hit that subscribe button and let's unlock another world. The story begins with the main heroine standing before an evil being she must defeat. This man's very presence radiated malevolent energy, and he called her by name Charlotte Eleanor. He then declared that he had been waiting for her all this time. The girl in turn stood before him, staring intently. Suddenly, the wizards who had come with her and were standing behind spoke up. One of the men told her not to do it, urging that they needed to retreat as soon as possible. It was because the sinister man standing before them brought only death. He could not be defeated by mere human strength. And if she, in her current condition, used any more magic, her life would be in danger. That's why they had to withdraw. At that very moment, the heroine interrupted him and asked where exactly they planned to retreat to. If they didn't end this now, wouldn't it mean the end for all of them? Her companion admitted that she was right, but said that things weren't that simple. Then, the girl tore a piece of cloth from her clothes and tied it around her injured eye. She said that this was exactly why she intended to fight until her last breath. After all, it was this man who had once taught her everything she knew. With a touch of irony, she added that magic yields to the will of the one who wields it. That's why they had no reason to fear. Mana and magic were her family and her friends. Her words deeply inspired those who stood beside her. Most of them were wounded or barely clinging to life. The girl took up her weapon and declared that the land beneath her feet was the place of her birth. Therefore, this world itself was her ally. A moment later, she unleashed her magic and struck at the enemy, and then two immense forces, light and dark, clashed in a fierce battle. And so it happened that, on the day of destruction, one girl saved the entire world. The enemy she had defeated spoke to Charlotte Eleanor before his death, telling her to remember his words well. Then he grabbed her by the clothes and pulled her close. He declared that he would come for her again, swearing that he would return and consume her completely, leaving nothing behind. After that fateful day, the entire world began to call this girl the Archmage. Sometime later, the girl's teacher fell gravely ill. During this period, the heroine stayed by his side and the man spoke to her. The girl was eating calmly while reading some book. Her companion told her that she was a genius of magic and that her abilities had far exceeded all his expectations. Coldly, the heroine replied that she already knew that, after which a brief silence filled the room. The teacher became angry and shouted, asking if she could at least try to be a little more modest. The heroine shouted back, demanding to know when he would stop acting like that, always pretending to be sick or on the verge of death. The maid, watching this, laughed and remarked that they were at it again. Then the old man stood up and patted the girl on the head. He said he had one last wish before death. But the heroine replied that he wasn't going to die. After all, it was just a common cold. Ignoring her words, he asked her to take on disciples of her own. Now that she had revealed her power to the world, many enemies would appear in her path, foes that only she could defeat. That was why she had to go and take on 5 disciples who would share this burden with her. He also asked her not to live her life in loneliness as he had. She must find love, build a family, and be happy. The heroine looked at her teacher with sadness and asked how she was supposed to do that. She admitted that she might be stronger, younger, and smarter than him. But how could she ever find such people? Hearing this, the teacher grew angry and immediately chased after her, demanding to know if this was what she called modesty. The maid once again watched the scene and, smiling, said that they were as full of life as ever. After some time, the teacher stopped and wondered where the girl had gone. He could no longer see her. The heroine, meanwhile, was hiding behind a wall, thinking about the disciples her teacher had mentioned. And from that moment on, much time passed, and many things changed. The extraordinary talent of Archmage Charlotte Eleanor eventually surpassed the level of the first 8 circles of magic. The students she had trained were hailed as the geniuses of the century. Some called Charlotte the heroine who saved the world from the spawn of evil. Others regarded her as the great hope of all magic. Yet despite all her accomplishments, in the end, death awaited her as well. One day, the heroine was walking and thinking how truly tired she was. Her foolish disciples were so clingy, and she couldn't understand why it was so hard to escape from them. She opened a massive door and stepped inside, reflecting on how they had even embedded tracking magic into a crystal orb. The moment they lost contact with her for even a second, they made such a fuss as if the end of the world had come. She wondered how she could tell them that she would soon die. Because of the blessing of the Fairy King, she had always looked young, and her students had long forgotten her true age. She tried to recall how old she was. Was it 120? Then she realized she was actually 122. She thought about how much time had passed and how many things had happened since then. She felt she had lived long enough. The girl understood that in this world, everything has a beginning and an end. Her heart ached with longing for her disciples. At that moment, she approached her own coffin, which stood in the center of the room, surrounded by a golden circle. She thought that she could not take care of her students forever. Each of them had their own path to walk. Still, she couldn't help but worry a little about the youngest one. But an old woman like her could no longer accompany them. The heroine could only hope that they would live good lives and fulfill their destinies. Then she lay down inside the coffin, remarking that she had never imagined she would die like this. After that, the heroine raised her hand and said that this would be her final spell. Once she cast it, the mana stored in her body would burst forth and spread across the entire world. Her spirit would then nourish the land and become the breath of a new god. She thought to herself that there could be no death more noble than this. Even her teacher would be proud. She had lived a worthy life, and at that moment she closed her eyes. In that very instant, as she did so, a whirlwind of memories swept through Charlotte's mind. She knew that when she died, each of her students would receive a letter containing her final will. She was certain they would be shocked, but she hoped they wouldn't grieve too much. Secondly, she remembered that the potato stew she'd eaten for dinner the previous night had been more delicious than usual. She also wished she could once again step on the face of that scoundrel with the horse-like mug who had burned her research. Before death, she also wished to fight Jeffrey one more time and finally win. Then she remembered that she had forgotten to repay her debt to a traveler at the tavern. She thought of a few more things, but then realized that everything else was fine. Yet there was one regret in Charlotte Eleanor's life, one she could never speak of to anyone. That regret was the simplest thing of all: love. Charlotte's life had been rich, filled with magic, battles, and care for her students. But despite her wisdom and vast experience, there was one thing she had never known. She had never known love. A love as fierce as fire, a tenderness as soft as the spring wind. She thought about it for a moment, then decided that it was fine as it was. She concluded that she had no other regrets in life. Still, she felt just a little sadness. Barely anything, really, maybe just a tiny bit. At that very moment, the spell she had cast took effect, and the building she was in was filled with a brilliant light. But after a short while, that bright light faded and the mana spread throughout the world. A moment later, some of the girl's priests addressed His Majesty, telling him that a more thorough investigation should be conducted in the lands of Rodon, and that he ought to consider the matter carefully. At that very moment, an envelope carrying a letter from their teacher arrived before him. When he received it, he immediately jumped up from his throne, startling his subjects. Then he rushed off somewhere, and they wondered where exactly he was heading. Another letter from the teacher also reached one of her other disciples. The girl was somewhere in a forest, and upon receiving it, she immediately understood what had happened. Another disciple was sitting in his study before a young man who was begging for mercy, insisting that he had only done what he was ordered to do, that those people had forced him. Suddenly, the heroine's disciple leapt to his feet, and silence filled the room. At that moment, he saw an envelope from his teacher flying toward his estate. Yet another disciple sat deep in the forest, holding a nest with baby birds. She softly told them to stay calm, since their nest had fallen. Then she heard her assistants approaching through the trees. When she turned around, she saw that they were carrying an envelope. Taking it into her hands, she realized it was her teacher's final will. One more disciple was in a snowy region. He too received the same letter and was shocked by its contents. Deeply distressed, he began to worry about Lady Charlotte. Meanwhile, the main heroine was still lying in that same place. Conscious once again, she began to open her eyes. She wondered if this was the final path. Perhaps her death spell had actually worked. It felt strangely pleasant, and she thought, is this how a person feels after death? Her body felt as light as a feather. She wondered if it was because her spirit had left her body. Then she realized she could see with her right eye, as if she were still alive. Opening her eyes fully, she couldn't believe what she saw. She really was alive, and began to climb out of the coffin in which she had lain. Rising a little, she looked around the room and confirmed that it was indeed her chamber. With fear and confusion, she asked herself why she was still alive. Could it be that her magic had failed? But she soon reasoned that even if it had, she should have died anyway. Then she noticed that her voice sounded strange. She raised her hands and saw that they were tiny, her clothes now far too big for her. Grabbing her face, she felt around in disbelief. Then it struck her. She had literally become a child. Terrified, she screamed. Thus, Archmaid Charlotte Eleanor, at the age of 121, who had devoted her life to serving the world, had seemingly fallen into eternal sleep. Her disciples were supposed to say farewell and weep at her funeral, vowing to protect the world in her stead so that she could rest in peace without worry. That was how it was meant to be. The heroine passing peacefully into the afterlife, leaving everything behind for her students. Yet now, things were entirely different. The heroine realized that Mana had indeed left her body, which meant her spell had worked. Yet she still didn't understand why she was alive or why her body had become so strange. She slid down to look at her reflection and saw that she had turned into a small child. Sadness filled her as she whispered in disbelief that she truly had become little. She thought that it simply couldn't be, for true magic comes from the will of the one whose heart desires it most. Then the heroine stepped outside to look at the world. She wondered if perhaps the one regret she had carried all her life was what had saved her, that the reason for it all was love. Somewhere else, a young man was sorting through gifts meant for a duke when he came across a letter. Opening it, he was startled to see the word love written inside. His colleague immediately asked if he was fooling around again, but the irritated young man remarked that it was simply ridiculous. Apparently, those people had never even met His Excellency, yet they kept sending him love letters. Just now, he was holding in his hands another message addressed to their beloved Duke Luster. The girl wondered if he was jealous. The man retorted that what she said was nonsense. She added that their outstanding Archduke had gained fame very quickly and now reaped the results of it. The man remarked that the whole situation was becoming more and more confusing. It seemed he needed to find a woman he liked and marry her as soon as possible. He really should have done that about 50 years ago. And today, a tiny girl had come, saying she was looking for His Grace the Archduke, even calling him by name. The man couldn't understand why such a pea-sized girl was being so rude. His colleague asked what little girl he was talking about. He replied that it really was a little girl, but her way of speaking was quite strange. He added that something about her felt off, and overall, she seemed very peculiar to him. Meanwhile, life flourished on the streets of that same city. A man bought some goods and walked along calmly. But suddenly, a little girl called out to him, addressing him as a young man. The man immediately turned around and saw the small girl who had spoken to him. She asked politely if he could tell her where the nearest magic shop was located. The man thought in surprise. Did she really just call him a young man? At that moment, the heroine wondered why everything had to be so complicated. The man pointed with his finger and told her to turn just around that corner. There she would see the main square. From there, she only needed to go to the 3rd street. He explained that the shop was on the 2nd floor of the house with the blue roof. Then he noticed the girl had fallen silent and asked if she could hear him. The heroine, meanwhile, thought that she had traveled all this way but still hadn't managed to find Jeffrey. Her mana rings were empty, so she couldn't use detection magic or teleportation. Before casting the spell, the girl had discarded her belongings, and now she literally had nothing left. She needed to sell something at the magic shop to earn some money. She thanked the man for his help and said goodbye, thinking that it somehow felt as if she had returned to the very beginning of her life's journey. Just as she walked away a short distance, a man suddenly flew out from a nearby building and slammed a door right into her previous conversation partner. The girl immediately turned around, shocked by what had happened behind her. There she saw the man pinned under the door, and sitting on it was another fellow with long hair. The girl quickly asked if the young man was all right. Suddenly, another man, the one who had slammed the door, stepped forward. He shouted that the guy was a fool and demanded that he repeat what he had just said. After all, they were now in Klaus, the land of knights. The man couldn't believe that someone dared to claim there existed a person stronger than their archduke, the master swordsman Loster. His opponent replied that such a person did exist, Charlotte Eleanor, the archmage of the Marvel Empire. The knight called him a scoundrel. How could a citizen of Klaus say such dreadful words? His opponent responded that first and foremost, he was a mage, and only second, a resident of the duchy. Hearing this, the heroine was shocked. Were they really fighting over something so foolish? The knight declared the mage a traitor and ordered him to stop polluting the pure air of Klaus with his presence and get out. The mage asked why he should leave. After all, he was a citizen of Klaus, even if a magician. But the knight snarled that he must have a death wish. The heroine suddenly shouted, demanding that they stop this nonsense and get down from the door. By that time, a crowd of onlookers had gathered. They began whispering that the men were apparently arguing about who was stronger, Archduke Luster or Archmage Charlotte Eleanor. Soon the spectators themselves started quarreling over the same question. The men then turned to the heroine and sneered, asking what that little brat had just said. They told her to stay out of adults' business and keep her distance. The heroine asked them to get down before they accidentally killed that poor young man. The mage asked why the girl spoke like his grandfather. His opponent exclaimed how that wretch dared to talk to a little girl like that. The heroine continued to listen as the men kept arguing endlessly. Her outburst immediately drew everyone's attention. The crowd fell silent, and the girl demanded that the men climb down from the door, since a man was lying right beneath it. Finally, she lost her patience and shouted for them to shut their mouths once and for all. They finally got down, and the heroine rushed to check if the man was all right. She thought with relief that it seemed everything had turned out fine. Then the crowd of onlookers began to applaud the girl for what she had just done. It turned out that she, without any help, managed to save the man from those two people. The knight didn't understand what had happened and asked what that was. Just a moment ago, his body had been moving on its own. He couldn't comprehend how, and immediately turned to the mage, asking if he had once again used a spell on his body. The crowd began whispering among themselves again. They too were curious about what had happened. It seemed that this child had just stopped a fight. Apparently, adults shouldn't behave like that in front of children. At that moment, Ruine thought that she simply didn't have time for this and wished they would just keep fighting as much as they wanted. Suddenly, a man approached and asked what was going on there. The crowd instantly froze at his words, and the main heroine also felt that the voice sounded quite familiar. The man who asked that question turned out to be Jeffrey. He slowly walked down the road, saying it had just been very noisy here. Everyone looked closely at the man, wondering who he was at first. Then someone exclaimed that he was the Archduke Louisler. The heroine remembered her friend and realized that it was Jeffrey. The young man, in turn, carefully examined the crowd, clearly searching for someone. Suddenly, his subordinates rushed after him, asking what had happened. After all, he had left right in the middle of their conversation. Considering his weak health, it was very difficult for them to keep up with him. The Archduke remarked that he was sure he had just sensed a familiar presence in the crowd. Then he asked if perhaps he had been mistaken. His subordinates stood behind him, breathing heavily and complaining that they were exhausted. Suddenly, the same knight approached his grace and asked Archduke Louisler to allow him the honor of meeting him. He said it was a great privilege and that he had always wanted to ask him something. Then he added that he wanted to ask what the Archduke thought of the Archmage Marvella Charlotte Eleanor. The Archduke looked at him and asked why he should answer such a question. The knight admitted that he was right. Everything was so obvious that there was no need to waste time answering. The knight continued that he thought the same way. It was ridiculous to even compare the Archduke and the Archmage. After all, how could an ordinary mage ever compare to a master of the sword? It's no wonder they say that the sword is a power unmatched in the entire world. How could some nameless girl possibly stand on the same level as the Archduke? That's why she should simply taste the bitterness of defeat. These words enraged Jeffrey. He immediately grabbed the man's head with his hand and squeezed tightly, growling aggressively that he should watch his tongue. Then he asked, hadn't the man wanted to become a knight? How unfortunate that his dream would never come true. Everyone watched in fear as the Archduke continued. He said that it seemed to him the man hadn't even trained his body. After that, he grabbed the man's other arm and said he should listen carefully. Klaus had no need for such a worthless man as him. One of the subordinates tried to urge his superior to stop the Archduke, but he said he couldn't. He was too afraid. Suddenly, the main heroine approached Jeffrey and told him to stop what he was doing. The man immediately froze and turned his gaze toward the girl standing behind him. Then she asked what he thought he was doing. Did he imagine himself a king or even a god? She added that he hadn't yet fallen into senile dementia, so why torment someone just over a few words? The young man replied that he merely wanted to scare the knight since the brat had said such terrible things. He was just playing with him. Then he grabbed the knight and threw him backward. After that, he approached the girl, knelt down beside her, and examined her face. After a moment, he muttered in disbelief. Could it really be Lottie? The girl confirmed that it was indeed her. Then a subordinate came up and asked Archduke Louisler if he had calmed down already. Then, noticing the girl, he asked if she was his daughter. But the Archduke immediately threw something at him, and the subordinate quickly added that it was just a joke. Then the young man told Lottie that her magical presence had been so weak that he almost thought he was mistaken. Then he smiled and said that it really was her after all. At that very moment, the crowd began whispering even more intensely. They wondered what was happening. Could this child really have stopped another fight? Someone asked if that was truly the Archduke Louisler himself. Jeffrey then picked the girl up and asked why she was still so small. The heroine immediately told him to put her back down. She was asking him nicely, for now. After that, they went together to the mansion. The heroine was choosing clothes for herself so she could move around comfortably. The woman assisting her said that this year, ribbons with lace were in fashion. And if the ribbon was decorated with jewels, it would look even more beautiful. Then the woman told the girl to just look at herself. She looked so elegant in that dress. Indeed, the heroine was already dressed in a white gown with a jeweled bow tied at the center. Jeffrey looked at her and said that he liked it, but wanted to see other designs as well. They immediately told him that, of course, many dresses of different cuts had been prepared for the fitting. The man said that was excellent. Then he wanted a dress from each design. But that annoyed the heroine, and she said she'd had enough. Then she asked the man what he was doing. She had already said that any outfit would be fine. He replied that she should understand. It was his first time seeing her in the form of a child. So what was wrong if she tried on this dress and a few others? Then the heroine turned to the young woman assisting her, who asked what she wanted. The heroine said that it would be enough and that she could go now. Jeffrey remarked that she really did enjoy causing him trouble. Then he added that that was indeed enough for now, and they could leave them alone. The woman immediately left the room, deeply shocked. She thought about what had just happened. She couldn't believe that this little girl dared to speak so casually to the Archduke. Sometime later, the man sat at a table with the girl. He asked why she looked the way she did. He had been unable to contact her for a long time, and judging by the state of her mana, he didn't think she had changed her appearance using any spell. Then he handed her a heart-shaped sweet and asked what exactly had happened. The heroine told Jeffrey that she had believed there were no regrets in her life. She had lived a full, eventful life and thought she had nothing left to strive for. But that turned out not to be true. Then she added that there had never been love in her life. At that moment, she ate the sweet that the Archduke had given her and thought it was quite delicious. The man then asked what she was trying to tell him with all this. He wanted her to explain. She said she had no regrets, but then what was this talk about love? He didn't understand what it had to do with her becoming a child. He froze for a moment and then asked if she had tried to kill herself. The girl hesitated, thinking how perceptive he was. Then she said that, of course, she hadn't meant to. It all just happened differently. Since things had turned out that way, she wanted to leave her mana to the world, to help it. The girl continued that, honestly, she had lived long enough and was a bit tired of everything. She had thought she was dead, but somehow she was alive again. Suddenly, she looked at her companion and was shocked. She saw tears streaming down from his eye. She immediately jumped up and asked what was wrong with him. The man said that nothing serious had happened. It's just that his eyes sweat from time to time. The girl looked at him in disbelief and asked what nonsense he was talking about. Then the man said that she really had planned to kill herself and hadn't even told him. The heroine became flustered and insisted that she hadn't killed herself. He replied that next time, if she decided to die, she should tell him. After all, he had lived long enough, and he would die together with her. Then he asked if it had all been because of the curse. It turned out that he blamed himself for everything. That day he should have stopped her, but couldn't. The heroine, her companion, said that this was just like Lottie, but she shouldn't have to bear all burdens alone. He asked why she couldn't rely on him, at least, since he was her close friend. The main heroine immediately replied that she was doing exactly that, asking her friend for help. Then she took his head in her hands, lifted it up to her, and said that the moon had decided to start a new life and had come to him for help, because he was her dear friend, Jeffrey Thane Lewistler. At that moment, her companion asked if she really had decided to start a new life. The girl said that yes, that was exactly what she had decided. Then she asked, doesn't magic always begin with a wish from the heart? So it seemed that magic had freed her from her only regret and given her this form. That's why she decided to live her life once more. This would be her new second life. Her companion looked at her intently and asked if her true wish had been love. He also asked if she meant love between a man and a woman. The girl said nothing, and he understood everything. Then he sighed sadly and said that perhaps they should start with her manner of speaking. She sounded like a little old lady. The heroine asked what he meant, not understanding what was wrong with the way she talked. At that very moment, one of the heroine's students entered the building where the girl was. He was in a hurry and wanted to find out what had happened to his teacher. He carefully examined the room where his mentor had once rested. There, in the center, he saw a coffin, and gold scattered all around it. He picked up a small piece of it and examined it closely. Then he left the room and declared that he would find his mentor no matter what it took. Sometime later, the main heroine and the Archduke were sitting at a table with another young man. He asked His Excellency what was going on here. The Archduke told him to simply answer the question he'd been asked. The heroine immediately asked if he remembered her. The man said that of course he remembered her. She was the strange little girl who had come in that morning. Jeffrey smiled and said that of course she was strange. Then he said they'd forget about that for now and asked the young man to introduce himself. The man was surprised and asked, just like that, to introduce himself out of nowhere. The Archduke replied that yes, exactly like that, and gave him 3 seconds to do it. The man panicked and said that his name was Phaeton Sylvan. He was 23 years old and unmarried, the third son of Marquis Sylvan. At the moment, he served as one of the knights of the great Archduke Leusler. He had sworn to serve his grace until death. His hobbies included reading, and his special skill was fencing. He also couldn't eat spicy food, though otherwise he wasn't picky. Jeffrey asked how this man compared to the girl. She replied that he, like her, couldn't eat spicy food, and Jeffrey said that meant he would suit her well. Then Jeffrey clapped his hands and stood up to congratulate the young man, saying he was now officially the Archmage's personal bodyguard. The man asked what he meant by that, but Jeffrey assured him that he was confident he'd do well. After that, he escorted the young man out of the room and said the rest of the job details would be provided later. The girl took a note and said that now they had found her a bodyguard. Next, they only needed to find her work. Jerry asked Lottie if she really intended to hide the truth from her students. The heroine replied angrily that yes, that's exactly what she was going to do. After all, they must have already received the letters with her last will. Now that her mana had left her, they wouldn't be able to trace her and would believe she truly died. The man said that if that's how she saw it, then fine. The heroine added that it really would be for the best. After all, her students had relied on her too much in the past. If they continued to believe she was dead, they could finally become independent and learn to live relying only on their own decisions. Suddenly, her companion remarked that it seemed she didn't know her students very well. She asked what he meant by that. The man replied that everything would go just the way she wanted, because the most important thing was that she had asked for his help. And for her sake, he was ready to do anything. He even said he could handle her students if needed. Hearing this, the heroine immediately got angry, grabbed the man by his tie, pulled him close, and demanded to know what he meant by handle. If he so much as touched her students, she'd kill him. Her companion quickly said he understood. Then he mentioned that his hands had suddenly started sweating again. But before he could continue, the heroine interrupted, saying she liked this personality of his. Then she handed him a paper. The Archduke looked at it and asked if this was about a certain county, a quiet rural land. He then read that the name Arya Lyson was written there. After that, he added that from this moment on, Archmage Charlotte Eleanor would become the daughter of Count Lyson, Arya Lyson. After that, Jeffrey rested his head on the girl's hand and softly said how happy he was that her eyes had healed again. He added that even in this life, he would always stay by her side and do everything he could to help her. As her best friend, he wished that her new life would be filled with happiness. The heroine thought that maybe this really was the new chance that mana and magic had given her. From now on, she would live not as an archmage who saved the world, nor as someone's teacher, but simply as an ordinary person. Sometime later, the heroine stood and asked her guard what those small red-haired creatures were. They looked like ripe apples. Indeed, in front of her stood children with bright red hair who looked very much like her guard. He immediately explained that they were new friends for Lady Arya, and also his cousins. It turned out that Jeffrey wanted her to have friends for her new life. Suddenly, the girl asked the man if that little one had just called them kids. The man looked at her and replied that since she was the youngest, she was actually the child here. This made the heroine furious, and she shouted Jeffrey's name in anger. At that same time, the Archduke was standing in his office when he felt a surge of magical energy approaching. Then he muttered that he had told Lottie she didn't know her students very well. At that very moment, one of her students materialized in his office, the same young man who had earlier come to her tomb. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. The Archduke turned to the man and said that he had come, just as he said he would. The young man demanded to know where she was. The Archduke asked who he was talking about, pretending not to understand. The young man clarified he meant Charlotte, and insisted the Archduke tell him where she was. The Archduke asked if the man was seriously questioning him. After all, wasn't he the one who should be asking the questions here? Lately, he hadn't been able to contact her and wondered if something had happened to Lottie. Suddenly, the glasses he was holding crumbled into dust. The heroine student said that if Lady Charlotte was staying in the lands of Klaus, there was no way the Archduke wouldn't know about it. And as he spoke, his expression turned frightening. Jeffrey remarked that young people these days were unbelievably rude. He said this because the student had actually injured him with magic. He added that even if the boy was his friend's student, there were still limits to everything. Right after that, the man grabbed his sword, saying that it seemed it was time to teach this brat some manners. But suddenly, he noticed two more figures appearing before him. The two who materialized were also students of the main heroine. Upon arrival, they immediately asked where their teacher was. Jeffrey sighed and said he gave up. After all, 3 against 1 was a bit too much even for him. Meanwhile, the main heroine was sitting at the table with her so-called new friends, who were fighting over food. The girl said that the dish was hers since he'd promised it to her last time. The boy teased her, saying she shouldn't believe everything and should stop eating so much. She was practically a pig already. Suddenly, the heroine turned to another little girl and told her to take the piece she had. There was no need to fight over food. The little girl immediately hugged the heroine sweetly and said she was so kind. Then she began to eat, and the boy called her a pig again. He turned to the heroine and asked why she had given away her portion. His sister already ate plenty. Then he offered his own piece and told her to take it. But Arya said she didn't need it and that he should eat it himself. He needed to eat more and grow big and strong. The boy looked at her and said she was really weird. Then he asked if she said her name was Arya Lyson. Immediately after that, he asked if he could just call her Arya. The girl looked at him carefully and thought for a moment. The heroine thought that yes, that was indeed her new name. Maybe Jeffrey was right after all. In this new life, she should also become a new person, not live as before. So she told the boy that of course he could call her that. The boy happily agreed, clearly delighted. The heroine thought that yes, she really should meet new people, live freely, and rest in this new place. And perhaps along the way, she might erase her one regret by meeting the person fate had prepared for her. But first, she needed to grow up a little. Suddenly, the Archduke's subordinate opened the office door. She immediately addressed His Excellency, noticing the chaos in the room, and that Jeffrey was the only one sitting on a chair. She was startled and asked what had happened during the night. He smiled and replied that, considering 3 of the Archmage's students had visited him, everything was perfectly fine now. Then he recalled what had happened the previous night. When the other 2 students arrived, they immediately grabbed the one who had come first. One of them, grabbing Evan by the collar, demanded that he explain what had really happened, since he had stayed with their teacher until the very end. But Evan quickly turned away from him and instead asked Jeffrey where their teacher was. The girl who had also arrived analyzed the situation and said that it seemed no one present actually knew where their teacher was. So something must have happened to her. She concluded this because she couldn't sense anything. No presence, no mana, nothing at all. It was as if their teacher had truly vanished from this world. The boy who came with her asked angrily what nonsense she was talking about. There had to be something. It was impossible that their teacher had simply disappeared from existence. Suddenly, Jeffrey interrupted their argument and asked if something really had happened to Lottie. Then he politely asked them to at least tell him the details. But at that moment, no one was listening to him, and the girl said that she didn't think this old man knew anything. Her companion agreed, saying he thought the same. Yet he still couldn't come to terms with everything after that letter she had sent them. A moment later, the girl declared that she would go meet Carcillion. Maybe if they followed their teacher's path from Marvel, they could find some clues. The boy added that he would find her even if he had to turn the whole world upside down. At that very moment, they both materialized and disappeared from the room. Thus, only Jeffrey and Evan remained. The boy told the Archduke that he would return, and right after saying that, he vanished as well. Now the man was left alone with his thoughts and remarked that it wasn't as if he was waiting for the boy to appear again in this room. Jeffrey now sat in his office, thinking about what had happened the previous night. He said he had to hide the girl well so that no one could ever find her. It meant that for some time, it would be better if they didn't see each other at all. After all those events, 8 years had already passed. The main heroine was walking down a path, followed by a young man holding flowers. Suddenly he shouted, "Lady Lyson, please wait for me!" He was blushing deeply, clearly embarrassed by what he was doing. The heroine stopped immediately and looked at the boy calling out to her. He approached, knelt before her, and offered her the flowers. Then he said, "Lady Lyson, my heart has belonged to you since the day we first met. That's why I ask you to accept my sincere feelings and become my wife." The girl looked at him in great surprise. She thought to herself that this boy looked like a child. She was sure she had seen him before, probably in the literature club. Judging by his appearance, he had likely only just reached adulthood. That was why she was so confused. The boy was about 19 years old, while she, in truth, was 129. So she apologized and said there was too large a gap between them, one she feared they could never overcome. Therefore, they could never be together. Then she turned and ran away, thinking she had to leave as quickly as possible. The boy tried to stop her, but she didn't listen. She understood that since she had cast the death spell and awakened in this young body, 8 whole years had already passed. All that time, she had been living as Arya Leeson. During these years, she had perfected every movement and mannerism of this girl. Yet even so, she could never rid herself of the feeling that her mind didn't belong to this body. After all, when she looked at that boy, she still thought of him as just a child. Even though he swore eternal love to her, she simply couldn't reciprocate. Suddenly, her friends, the ones she had met 8 years ago, called out to her. One of them asked why she was taking so long, and another told her to hurry up and join them. The heroine immediately told them she was on her way. Yet, with sadness in her heart, she thought that even in this life, love would remain an unattainable dream for her. Then the girl approached her friends, unaware that someone was walking behind her. The person was fully cloaked, with a hood covering their face, making them nearly impossible to recognize. But when he looked at the girl, he realized that it really was Charlotte, and he recognized her instantly. The next events took place in the Klaus Empire, more precisely in the city of Aventa, the imperial capital. At that moment, a white-haired girl was running through the outskirts of the city. She looked terrified, trying to hide from someone chasing her. A few seconds later, she managed to hide behind a house in a narrow alley. She was trembling with fear and covered her mouth so as not to make a sound. But suddenly, her pursuer caught up and asked in a chilling voice whether she was hiding there. After that, he said that all this was strange since he was sure that she had gone exactly here. Then he asked if it really just seemed to him. The girl thought that probably he would leave now, but it was not as she thought, and the guy began to approach her. And then, after a moment, the girl noticed that the guy was already standing in front of her. She got very scared and immediately stepped back. She also noticed that other people had come with him, not only he himself. The guy told the miss that everything was fine and that she should just not be afraid. And all this because they really were not bad people. At this time, in another part of the city, the host in a fine suit asked for attention. He told those present that now the time had come for their introduction. Then he introduced the main heroine together with her companions and said that these were new members of the club. It turns out that these people would be growing the happy Lulu together with them. Right after that, he asked my members to introduce themselves. The first to say her name was the main heroine and said that her name was Arya Leeson. Then it was her friend who said that she was Judith Halford. The last one introduced himself and said that his name was Jerome Halford. At that moment, everyone clapped happily and wished them a pleasant time. The heroine just thought that she already had a literature club, and also a dance club and a meditation club. And now, it turns out, also a Lulu growing club. Right now, she wondered what that Lulu even meant. Judith whispered to her friend that it was a new fashionable trend in the city of Avente to grow Lulu. Therefore, she asked, wasn't it wonderful? At that very moment, the man said that there was a small explanation for the new members of the club. Then he showed the plants and said that Lulu was a new type of flower that the magician Marvella Hit Lulu had bred 3 years ago. It turns out that this flower has a magical property. It changes the color of its petals depending on the change of mood of the person who planted it. It turns out that when a person is happy, the petals are colored in bright tones, and when a person is sad, the flower darkens. But also a very romantic story is connected with this plant. It happens very rarely, but if the petals of Lulu acquire a deep red color, it means that the person who planted it will meet the love destined by their own fate. The heroine at that moment listened to the man very attentively. Then this man said that they should wait a little, and now he would bring the seeds for their newcomers. The heroine immediately thought what kind of love destined by fate that was supposed to be. At the same time, that very man handed them the seeds. The girl thought that now even such things were being done. Suddenly, Judith grabbed the girl by the hand and pulled her somewhere. She said that now they must go to a new place. The heroine asked where they still needed to go. At that time, the man who had been talking to them said that they should be careful, because the seeds were already planted in the pots. The companion noticed that after all, they hadn't been in the capital for a long time, and they really needed to manage everything. Arya noted that they would stay here for some more time, so there was no need to hurry now. The friend noted that she was right, but if she did nothing again, she would just sit in the room once more. At that moment, while they were walking, some guy was already watching them. After some time, the heroine noticed that they had already been walking around the city for 10 days, and perhaps they should take a rest. The friend noted that they needed to go and eat some cake. After all, there was a place nearby. At that very moment, while they were talking about this, a mysterious stranger reached out his hand to the main heroine. But almost immediately, her friends grabbed the guy by the hand. At the same time, they asked strictly who he was. Arya looked at this man and said that they should let him go, because after all, it was Lord Sylvan. At that very moment, he removed his hood and greeted them. At the same time, he said that they had done well indeed. Jerome immediately asked why this man had put on that strange cloak. His sister added that yes, indeed, why had he tried to sneak up to them like a thief? The man noted that he needed to deliver a message unnoticed, and that's why he had done so. After that, he immediately turned to Arya in a whisper and told her something. The interlocutor told her that Jeffrey was waiting for her in a carriage nearby. Because of this, the main heroine went there. When the girl entered the carriage, the Archduke immediately addressed Lottie. He was sitting there with a huge bouquet of flowers and said to the girl that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The heroine was dazzled by all this and thought what it could be. Then she sat down in front of him and asked if he was returning from a party since she did not understand what those flowers were. The interlocutor noted that he had made them by the road and asked whether they did not smell wonderful. Then he asked if she wanted him to give them to her, but Arya refused. Right after that, Jeffrey said that the girl did not look well. At the same time, he asked if something had happened and whether she had heard any strange rumors. The heroine asked what kind of rumors he was talking about, but the interlocutor noted that it was not important at all. Then he asked whether the girl liked it in the capital of Klaus. The girl noted that everything was wonderful, since it was a very peaceful and lively atmosphere here, and therefore a good city. Then the Archduke asked, what about love? He was very interested whether she had found the love that would help her erase her regret. The heroine immediately hesitated and did not know what to answer. The man saw this and asked if that was not the reason she had come to the capital. She noted to him that it was not exactly so. After that, Jeffrey leaned very close to the girl and removed a small leaf from her hair. At the same time, he asked, what if she looked a little closer? After all, she still did not know. Maybe it was much closer than she thought. He said that maybe even very close and immediately sat down in front of the girl. Suddenly, the heroine exclaimed that yes, she had wanted to ask him exactly about a close person. Then she added that she had wanted to ask about the former captain of the Knights Baron. She asked if it was true that this man was a little over 90 years old. She was curious whether he was still unmarried and if the man could introduce her to him. Suddenly, the interlocutor told Lottie that this man had died last year of old age. The girl was surprised and said that she understood. That's how it was. Then she added, well, rest in peace to that man. After that, she remarked that maybe she should be glad she hadn't died at her age yet, and was still thinking about love. The interlocutor noted that she shouldn't say such things, but should think instead about the people close to her. Then the heroine asked about the Minister of Finance, Alfonso. Jeffrey noted that his great-granddaughter was just about to get married these days. The interlocutor said, really? And that she wanted to congratulate her. Then she wondered why the man was yelling at her. She also added that his trousers would get dirty, so she asked him to sit properly. At that very moment, the Duke sat down and was very sad. The girl looked at this and asked what was wrong and what had happened to him again. The man noted that he just felt a little sad. Suddenly, the heroine turned again to Jeffrey and asked if there was any news from Marvella. She was very interested to know about her students. Then the man turned to Lottie. Taking a deep breath, he said that the sky of Marvella was just the same as the sky of Klaus. Peaceful. As a result, Arya looked carefully at the sky and asked if that was really true. Then she looked up very thoughtfully, remembering her students. In another place at the same time, knights were chasing one of the girl's students. They turned into an alley and saw that he was there, and at the same time called for reinforcements. They also ordered Dan Monty to stand still. The guy still did not listen to them and kept running away. But suddenly he stopped, since he saw that knights were standing in front of him and also behind him. It turned out that there was simply nowhere for him to run now. The knight said that if he continued to run, he would only worsen his situation, and that was why they asked him to go with them. Dan immediately noted that it was all very foolish on their part. At the same time, he asked why they were wasting their strength chasing him. At that very moment, he materialized and disappeared from the knights. They tried to stop him, but it was already too late. The heroine had just returned to her friends. Her friend asked whether she had already talked with Brother Sylvan, But then her friend told Arya that she had forgotten her gloves in the club. She was sad because they were a limited edition. The girl told her that she would bring them, but her friend said that they should go together and take them. Yet the heroine added that they shouldn't do that because she would go alone, since she wanted to be by herself. Her friends at that time did not quite understand her situation. The girl said that she would be back soon, and they should go and eat some cake together for now. After that, she went alone to that very place. The friend, looking at the departing girl, said that Arya looked very exhausted. The brother noted that it was probably because of her. Judith wondered what that scoundrel was saying. Jerome noticed that she only drags people around with her. His sister remarked that he himself suggested going to the Lulu Growing Club, so it was his own fault. Suddenly, they noticed a crowd of knights running nearby in great haste. The sister asked in surprise what was happening there. The brother also asked if that was really the Capitol Guard right in front of them. Then they exchanged glances, not understanding what was going on. The main heroine, after leaving her friends, was walking around the city outskirts. Now she was walking by the river and thinking about everything. The girl thought that if she still went to the Capitol, she could find out news about her own students. She was tormented by thoughts of whether they were all right. At the same time, she realized that probably nothing special was happening in their lives. After that, she thought that she should think positively, not gloomily. After a short while, she finally reached that very place and, opening the door, thought that it was so quiet. She wondered if everyone had already left. Then she looked ahead and saw a guy there. His silhouette seemed quite familiar to her, as if she had seen him before. At that time, the friends, the main characters, were talking with local residents. They were told about some kidnappings and that the townspeople were very alarmed by what was happening. Jerome wondered if they meant that the guards were in such a hurry because the kidnapper was somewhere nearby. He was told that this was indeed the case. Then the guy told his sister that they urgently needed to go after Arya. After all, he was worried because she had gone alone. Suddenly, their interlocutors asked whether they really didn't know anything. In fact, all the commotion was because, according to rumors, the suspect turned out to be Dan Monte from Marvel. The guy asked who this Dan Monte was. The interlocutor wondered how he could ask that. Hadn't they heard of him? It turns out that this guy is the leader of the Black Moon. It also turns out that they should know about Charlotte Eleanor, who is an outstanding archipelago of Marvel. And precisely this person is the third student of Charlotte Eleanor. At that very time, the main heroine met that same guy, who was standing together with Lulu. Dan was standing and looking at a flower when he suddenly noticed that someone was standing nearby. Then he turned his head toward that person and saw that it was some unidentified figure covered with outer clothing. After that, a deathly silence hung between them, and no one even spoke. The heroine was very worried about this and immediately turned to run away. But the guy didn't want to let her go and immediately chased after her. The girl was running very fast, so he used his movement ability and appeared right beside her. At the same time, he told her to stop where she was. At that very moment, the girl stretched out her hand and used her power to push the guy away. He did not expect that and could not defend himself. That is why he was thrown back several dozen meters. A moment later, the guy got up and thought about what had just happened. But while he was thinking about all this, the girl had already disappeared without a trace. Soon the heroine was back with her companions. She was frightened and out of breath. Her friend asked Arya what had happened to her. The girl said that nothing special had happened and asked them to go home quickly. Suddenly, her friend asked if she had seen the kidnapper. The heroine asked in surprise what kidnapper they were talking about. She was told that they themselves did not know all the details. But judging by the conversations, a series of kidnappings had recently taken place in Avente. These were very bad people who took townspeople regardless of their gender or age. But they still could not be caught, because a very powerful person was behind these crimes. The heroine asked what they were talking about and then asked who the main suspect was. Her friend told her that the suspect was Dan Monte. The girl was shocked when she heard those words. Then the guy asked if she also knew who that was. It turns out that this person is the third student of Charlotte Eleanor. It turns out that this woman is the great archmage of the Marvel Empire. Suddenly, Jerome wondered how ordinary guards would be able to capture him. But then he added that he thought perhaps Archduke Luista was capable of handling it. His sister asked why a resident of Marvel would kidnap people in the city of Klaus. Their interlocutor remarked that perhaps there were reasons behind it that they knew nothing about. Suddenly, they all looked at Arya together, and she seemed somewhat nervous. Immediately, her friends asked what had happened to her. The heroine thought to herself, Could it be that this foolish Dan is kidnapping people in Klaus? Then the girl remembered what had happened 30 years ago. One day, a woman approached her and addressed her as Lady Eleanor. She said that another explosion had happened again. Then she added that it seemed she was not strong enough to handle that terrible demonic blood flowing in his veins, and she wondered how much longer she would have to suffer because of him. After all, that child was a real devil. It was very painful and sad for the main heroine to hear all this. Because of that, she went to the room where Dan was sitting. Then she knocked on the door, and the boy shouted for them all to get out. After all, he had already told everyone to go away. The mentor did not listen to him and immediately said that she was coming in anyway. After that, she opened the door and went into his room. When she opened it, she saw the boy sitting frightened under the table. The whole room he was in was completely destroyed, and all the things were scattered around. After that, she told the boy that he was very scared. She also added that she had thought the danger had already passed, but unfortunately she had been mistaken. Then the heroine came closer and knelt beside him. She said that, fortunately, everyone was safe. And it turned out he had tried so hard to control his powers. And he had even managed to do it. Right after that, the woman apologized for being late and addressed Dan. She asked the boy to come closer. The boy sat there in tears, thinking for a moment. The mentor noticed that he was taking too long. After all, her and the teacher's arms were already getting tired. The boy suddenly rushed into her arms and hugged her tightly. Then he started crying even harder and asked if everyone was really safe. The woman reassured him that no one was hurt. The student looked into her eyes and asked if that meant he wasn't a devil. The woman smiled and told him, "Of course not." The boy brightened up and said that was a huge relief. Meanwhile, the main heroine sat in a cafe and said it must have been some kind of misunderstanding. The butler overheard and asked what she meant by that. The girl quickly realized she had said it out loud and replied that she hadn't said anything at all. Apparently, she was just talking to herself again. A moment later, she turned to the butler and asked if he'd ever heard of people being kidnapped in Event. The man asked what she was talking about. Then, after thinking for a bit, he said he didn't know any details but asked what exactly had happened. At that same time, her companions were, as usual, fighting each other. The butler asked them to stop. The heroine sank into thought. She realized that Jeffrey must have known about it, yet said nothing to her. But she had to find out for sure. Later that night, her friends were all sound asleep in their beds. The girl, however, was awake. She got dressed, went to the window, and jumped out, landing gracefully as if she did it every day. Pulling up her hood to hide her face, she thought that she had to start investigating this matter herself. She climbed onto a rooftop to get a better view. Below, she saw a large number of knights. Judging by their numbers, city security had clearly been strengthened. She spent the rest of the night sneaking through the city, looking for signs of missing people or suspicious figures. After some time, she climbed another rooftop and spotted something strange. All the knights below were lying unconscious. Realizing this, she leapt down immediately, thinking that the kidnapper was indeed active in the capital. Now she had to figure out where he had gone. Suddenly, she heard someone screaming, a man shouting loudly. Nearby, some people told him that yelling wasn't a good idea. They also remarked that they weren't bad people. The man holding the screaming boy said he had passed out and asked his companions what they thought. After all, their hair looked surprisingly similar. One of them added that it would be perfect if their eye colors matched too. Another objected, saying the boy wasn't even a woman. But someone replied that it didn't matter. His appearance was close enough. The man still insisted that no matter how you look at it, he's a man. Suddenly, they grabbed him by the collar and asked if he was trying to pick a fight. Meanwhile, behind a nearby wall, another girl was hiding. The leader sensed something and said that someone else was there. The master instantly used teleportation and appeared behind the wall, startling the woman hiding there. He asked how she was doing, addressing her politely. The terrified woman begged for mercy. The master remarked that witnesses could cause them trouble later, then asked what spare her really meant. He assured her they didn't plan to hurt her. He added that the situation was simply inconvenient, and she didn't fit the usual criteria for their targets anyway. Then he asked his companions what they should do now. The woman, trembling, realized that nothing good awaited her. Suddenly, the heroine appeared and asked the same question. What would they do now? She declared that first they should apologize for scaring the young lady, send her home safely, and then turn themselves in to the guards to face justice. Everyone turned toward her in shock. The master asked who she was. The girl replied that she herself wasn't quite sure who she was either. Then she suddenly leapt forward and struck the master hard across the head. He didn't expect such a swift attack and fell to the ground immediately. Furious, the heroine shouted, asking if they really intended to kidnap people. She couldn't believe they had fallen so low. The men stared at her, confused about who she even was. The heroine continued, saying that she had never taught anyone to behave like this. Shocked, they asked what she meant. The girl said that standing before her was Gilhart, the leader of the Black Moon. The master, startled, asked how she knew his name. The heroine fell into thought again. If the head of the Black Moon was involved, that meant the order came directly from Dan, but she couldn't understand why he would do such a thing. Then she suddenly shouted that they should kidnap her too, since she wanted to be part of this kidnapping herself. The leader laughed when he heard that. One of his subordinates came closer and whispered that the girl was crazy and asked if they should deal with her. The leader told him not to. He said they should take another look at her. After all, the girl had golden eyes. Radiant golden eyes and wheat-colored hair shining with a soft silver light. He called her a mystery and said it had been a long time since he'd seen such perfection. She was exactly the type of person they were looking for. The master then asked the young lady to allow them to accept her generous offer and kidnap her. He added that war had already begun between them, and so, moments later, they all left together, leaving behind the frightened woman they had first tried to kidnap. On a nearby rooftop, another figure was silently watching everything. Sometime later, the heroine was sitting at a table with a man who told her that he was the one who had given those people their orders. The man said he couldn't imagine why they would want an old man like him. The girl sitting across from him replied that she had said nearly the same thing, that they had insisted on taking her even though she was useless. They told her that no one in this world is useless and that every life has value. The man asked if they really said that. The girl confirmed it and added that she had been surprised at first, too. Sitting at the table, the heroine thought how strange the situation was. Everyone here was calmly chatting and drinking tea together, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. The atmosphere was relaxed and casual. The girl wondered if they really had been kidnapped. She also realized there were quite a few people gathered, far more than one or two. She couldn't help but wonder why they needed so many. But then she remembered. They said they were looking for someone who matched her description. A girl with soft, silvery hair that shimmered in the light, full and flowing, and radiant golden eyes. At that moment, the heroine felt a bad premonition. Strange thoughts filled her mind, but she tried to convince herself it couldn't be true. Suddenly, a young man entered and asked for everyone's attention, apologizing for making them wait so long. He said that before anything else, he wanted to thank them all for their cooperation. Then he explained that they would now begin clarifying what was going on. He asked if any of them owned a pet, perhaps a big dog or even a cow. One of the girls shouted that she had a cat at home. Another person said they had a dog. The young man smiled, saying that this situation might remind them of their pets, sometimes moody but never attacking or biting their owners. So there was nothing to worry about. Then he asked if they should begin. For their own safety, he said, they should all line up in a single row. The heroine stared in confusion, wondering what was happening. The whole crowd began moving toward a curtained doorway. The heroine leaned out from the crowd, trying to see what was going on inside. In the dimly lit room, she saw a man sitting next to some kind of glowing device. The heroine immediately recognized him. It was Dan. He suddenly sensed her gaze and looked back at her coldly. The heroine quickly hid behind the girl standing in front of her, thinking how unwell Dan looked. For a moment, she even thought he might explode, but then realized he was just deeply unsettled. She couldn't understand what was going on. Soon, another girl stepped forward while one of Dan's subordinates held a small box in his hands. Inside was an eye band, the same kind the heroine herself used to wear. Each time a girl stepped forward, the subordinate would place the band on her head, then ask Dan if she resembled her. The heroine finally understood what was happening. The subordinate kept calling for the next person, putting the eye band on them one after another, until it was her turn. When the heroine stepped forward, she felt a wave of fear. The subordinate asked her to approach. Dan, eyes closed, seemed to be focusing on something. Then he asked her to stand before him, and she obeyed. In that instant, Dan opened his eyes and stared directly at her. The heroine made a strange face, trying not to be recognized. Dan looked at her coldly. The subordinate asked if he was sure it wasn't her, and whether they should let her try on the band. But the leader firmly ordered them to call the next candidate. The heroine stepped back, feeling a deep sadness. Was Dan really searching for people who looked like her? Then she suddenly heard him call someone teacher, and that familiar word made her turn around. There stood an old man wearing the same kind of eye band and smiling at Dan. The boy continued calling that man teacher. The old man asked who this wonderful young man was. The subordinate said they'd choose this man for today. The heroine watched in shock, wondering what her student was thinking. The old man was asked to sit down. The heroine couldn't believe it. He didn't look like her at all, and he was a man. Dan then ordered everyone else to be sent home and apologized for the inconvenience. Then she saw her student turn to the old man and sadly confess that he couldn't sleep. The heroine's heart ached at those words. She didn't know what to do, but she couldn't reveal her true identity now. A little later, everyone else was dismissed. They were told to keep everything secret and to take the gifts they were given. They were also wished a safe journey home. The heroine took her small pouch as well. After walking away, she opened it and found gold coins inside. "This is really strange," she murmured. Suddenly, one of Dan's subordinates approached her. He said he had thought she was the one they were looking for. They'd been searching for a very specific person for a long time, and among everyone, she had fit the description best. But now it seemed he had been mistaken. He added that the old man would stay for a while and then they would safely escort him home. She had nothing to worry about. They wouldn't harm him. Their leader simply suffered from insomnia and needed someone to tell him stories so he could sleep. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to sleep at all. The heroine asked why he was even telling her all this. The man admitted he didn't know, maybe because he felt bad she hadn't been chosen. Then he wished her a safe journey home. He added that if she wanted to report them to the guards, she was free to do so. It wouldn't change anything anyway. Then he turned and slowly walked away. A moment later, the heroine threw the pouch of coins onto the ground and ran off, thinking, what on earth was that all about? Sometime later, she arrived at her destination. It was already late, and when she burst through the door, the people inside were startled. One of them told her they were already closed for the night. The heroine ignored them, out of breath, and asked if they knew who the Archmage Charlotte Eleanor of Marvel was. The surprised people exclaimed, "Of course they did. How could anyone not know such a great person?" The girl quickly asked if they knew anything about her disciples, whether there were stories or rumors about Charlotte's 5 students. She cried out, begging them to tell her everything they knew. The woman she spoke to began explaining that Charlotte's first disciple was, if she wasn't mistaken, the Emperor of Marvel himself. 6 years ago, everyone was talking about him. He had gathered the Empire's mages and invaded Klaus, claiming he was searching for someone. The woman had feared it would start a war. The entire country had been buzzing with news, and she wondered how the heroine could not have heard about such an event. Then she said it was just a rumor, but perhaps the girl should also know that her second disciple is the guardian of the Pantheon. Apparently, she tried to resurrect someone, and as a result of overlapping spells, she destroyed half of the sacred forest of the Pantheon. If she hadn't stopped her research, she probably would have doomed the entire world. The woman's interlocutor asked whether these were just rumors or not. Then the man asked if they were really talking about the third disciple. Were they discussing Dan Monte, the leader of the Black Moon? It seemed this man was nothing but the embodiment of evil. Apparently, something happened 8 years ago, and he went insane. Before that, he caused chaos all over the continent, and now he has moved to Klaus. The man wondered if all the commotion in the city was because of him. Suddenly, another girl joined the conversation. She asked if there were any rumors about the 4th disciple. Then she recalled hearing something about the 5th one. Supposedly, he had died. She thought there was something about the domain of the devil. It was said he went to a forbidden place where no human could enter, all just to find someone. And that's where he died. After learning all this, the heroine immediately went to the mansion of her friend Jeffrey. Upon entering, she was met by his subordinates, and one of the men asked how Lady Lyson had managed to enter. Another servant asked what she was doing there at such a late hour. The girl ignored them and kicked open the door to his room. Her friend looked closely to see who had arrived. The subordinates wanted to address the Archduke, but he told them it was fine, and that they could leave, so they did. Then Jeffrey turned to Lottie. The girl remarked that she hadn't heard any rumors. Even though she had been living in a village, she hadn't heard a thing. Neither about these incidents nor about countless other rumors. That could only mean one thing. After that, she ran up to the man and grabbed him by his clothes, saying that he must have had a hand in all of this, calling him by his full name, Jeffrey Thane Looster. Her interlocutor admitted she was right. It had indeed been him. At that moment, there was a huge dent in the wall from how hard she had slammed him into it. Jeffrey told her that her disciples were no longer little children who needed her constant protection and care. After all, she herself had said she wanted to start a new life. And since he knew about her wish, he wanted her to truly live her life for herself. The heroine noted that he had answered only one of her questions. She wanted to know, Were any of those rumors true? The man took her hand and said that, true or not, she shouldn't worry about it. Those events were things of the distant past, and she shouldn't resort to magic over such nonsense. He reminded her that in her condition, she couldn't use mana. Meanwhile, the Archduke's subordinates were peeking from behind the door. They were shocked by everything happening inside and couldn't help wondering what was going on. Suddenly, they saw the heroine hit the man hard on the head. At that moment, the girl declared that since she couldn't use magic, she would use her fists instead. Right now, she was asking nicely, and he'd better be kind enough to answer properly. After a short while, Jeffrey brought over a massive stack of papers. He pointed to them and said that it was all the information he had gathered about her disciples' deeds over the past 8 years. Seeing the mountain of papers, the heroine was stunned. She told him not to make fun of her, but he replied that he wasn't mocking her. He had simply organized everything properly. The girl wondered what exactly her troublesome disciples had been up to all this time. Then her companion added that she should know he was also quite surprised. He had to work hard to make sure she didn't find out about any of this. The heroine thought that maybe he really wanted her to kill him right then and there. She walked up to the papers to take a closer look. The man apologized and told Lottie that he was looking for a way out. The heroine asked what he meant by that. He explained he was referring to the curse. It hadn't disappeared. Apparently, she had tried to kill herself and hadn't told them anything because she knew it would cause them pain. And now he declared he wouldn't let that happen. No matter how long it took, he would find a way to break it. That's why he asked her not to worry about anything for now. Meanwhile, the girl flipped through some of the papers and turned to Luster. She said that yes, she truly had said she wanted to live a new life, but that didn't mean she would abandon her disciples to their fate. Jeffrey replied that he knew that perfectly well. After all, this whole new life and search for love thing was just an excuse not to face her disciples again, but the heroine insisted that it wasn't. It was the truth. Her companion immediately asked Lottie to just tell him the truth, honestly and without embellishment. The girl thought to herself that she really was telling him the truth right now. Sometime later, one of the Archduke's subordinates came to see him and addressed His Excellency. Behind him were others who looked very concerned. The man said he didn't know why the Archduke wasn't responding or leaving his room, but now he would have to check on him personally to make sure everything was all right. As soon as he opened the door, he was horrified by what he saw. Jeffrey was lying in the middle of the room, with a huge pile of papers beside him. There was also a massive dent in the wall directly in front of him. The man was terrified and immediately called out to His Excellency, asking if he had been attacked last night. Jeffrey calmly replied that he had simply received a visit from the greatest mage in the world. The subordinate then asked if life was still flowing through his veins. Jeffrey noted dryly that he could see for himself that it still was. The subordinate said he meant the life of the attacker. After all, they had to interrogate him immediately and find out who had given such a strange order. The Archduke told him to stop shouting and to leave, as he wanted to be alone. But the man was persistent, so the other subordinates took him away. They reminded him that His Excellency had said he wished to be alone, and then they closed the door behind them. Jeffrey sat there in sorrow, thinking that the girl must surely hate him now. After that, he stood up and looked at the piece of paper in his hand. It contained the reports about the incidents involving the girl's disciples. He sighed, thinking how wonderful it would be if it were just the two of them in this world. Sometime later, the heroine got up from her bed and began to dress. At that moment, her maid entered the room. The maid was surprised and told Lady Arya that she had woken up quite early today. She added that she had come to place fresh flowers in the room and then asked if she should bring the lady some warm tea. The heroine declined, but thanked her for the offer. Then she took her hat and said she would go out for a short while on personal business. She asked the maid to inform Rom and Judy if they came looking for her. The maid asked if she was going alone, offering to tell the butler to prepare a carriage. Arya told her not to do that. After a while, the girl left the room, and the maid remained standing there alone, thinking how strange everything was. Could something have happened to her lady? Meanwhile, the heroine was descending the stairs, thinking how carefree she had lived. How could she have believed that her disciples would easily accept her death just because her will said so? She had never considered how hard it must have been for those children without her. Suddenly, she recalled her friend's words, that she should know she couldn't use magic in her current state. But the girl thought that, though slowly, her mana rings were beginning to recover. Still, because of that same curse, it was as if Archmage Charlotte Eleanor had truly died 8 years ago and vanished from this world. She then realized that her children had to learn the truth and accept her death. After all, they had the strength to live even without her. She was now hiding behind the wall of a city building, thinking that the first thing she had to do was stop these abductions. Then she noticed that the same people had been here last night, so they had probably already left the place by now. But of course, they couldn't have gone too far. Still, she had no idea how to track them down. She wondered where they could have gone when suddenly she heard the door of a nearby building open. Looking up, she saw a hooded mage step outside. The girl stared intently and thought, were they still here? She found it odd that violators of public order in the city of Klaus would act so openly. Then she stopped and realized how truly strange all this looked. A moment later, the heroine decided to take action. She stepped out from behind the corner and addressed the young man, saying that she thought she was lost. She explained that she had been looking for the Looster Memorial Park and hoped that he could help her find it. The man turned around and studied her carefully, realizing she was the perfect fit for what he was looking for. At that very moment, he grabbed her and exclaimed that she had come just in time. Such a lovely victim walking right into their hands. As soon as he said that, another man suddenly rushed toward him and struck the one who had grabbed the heroine with tremendous force. From the impact, the attacker immediately fell to the ground. The girl looked at the stranger in confusion, and he, in turn, looked back at her. Then he quickly approached the fallen man again, grabbed him, and prepared to hit him once more. The heroine saw this and shouted for him to stop, and the mysterious stranger obeyed at once. At that moment, she wondered why this man had appeared so suddenly. Could he have been following her? She turned to him and asked if he was the one who had been watching her for the past few days. The stranger didn't answer. Suddenly, sounds came from inside the building. Members of the group were asking what that noise was and if the others had heard it too. Realizing danger, the heroine grabbed the man's hand and pulled him away from there. When the others came out of the building, they saw one of their comrades lying unconscious on the ground, with a young woman sitting beside him. They were astonished and demanded to know what was happening and who the girl was. The heroine calmly lifted her head and said she had just been passing by and saw a man lying unconscious, so she stopped to check on him. The group members exchanged surprised looks, then smirked, saying they understood what was really going on. After that, they surrounded the heroine and suggested she come with them to explain everything in detail. The girl glanced toward the mysterious stranger peeking from behind the corner and motioned for him to leave. He watched her closely, realizing things were far more complicated than they seemed, and quietly began to disappear. Soon after, the heroine was taken inside the building. There were already other people there who had also been abducted. The girl was chained and sat among the frightened captives. Suddenly, several men approached her. One of them said they were very lucky today. They'd be able to earn a good sum of money from these captives. Another asked what had happened to their comrade Darren. He was told that Darren still hadn't regained consciousness. The first man asked what had really happened to him, but his companion replied that no one knew. Maybe he'd just collapsed. Meanwhile, the heroine realized that these people clearly weren't members of the Black Moon organization. While she was deep in thought, she heard people greeting someone named Lord Dan Monte. Curious, the girl turned her head to see who he was. The man asked his subordinates if everything was ready. They replied that they hadn't finished yet. He grew angry and demanded to know why they were working so slowly. He ordered them to get their lazy behinds moving. They were supposed to have already departed. The subordinates quickly replied that they understood Lord Monty. The boss told them to handle these captives first and to move faster. The heroine looked at the man and thought, did they just call him Dan? She knew for sure that this man wasn't her disciple. Suddenly, one of the other captives asked, could that really be Dan Monte? He wondered if they had truly been captured by the Black Moon organization. One of the guards confirmed it proudly. Yes, they were indeed the Black Moon of Marvel. And the man before them was none other than the third disciple of Archmage Charlotte Eleanor, Lord Dan Monty himself. Therefore, he warned the captives not to even think about escaping. The heroine sat silently, listening carefully to every word. She realized that these people were impersonating Dan and his order, committing all sorts of atrocities in their name. The man pretending to be Dan asked who that other person was. He was told that the man had just been lying in the corner. The leader asked if he was dead or alive. Someone replied that it seemed he was still breathing. The boss grinned and said that was perfect. They should throw him in with the others. Laughing, he added that they were lucky indeed, getting another one without any effort. The heroine looked closely at the man lying on the floor and thought, could that really be Dan? The girl was confused and couldn't understand what had happened to him. She wondered if his people had forgotten him and left him here. Suddenly, the leader shouted that they needed to hurry up and leave before the guards arrived. At that moment, the gang members dragged Dan's body toward the heroine. As soon as she looked at him, she realized what was going on. He wasn't injured, just asleep. The girl reached out her hand to gently stroke his head. In that moment, a wave of memories flooded over her. She remembered sitting in her office when someone had once approached her. It was her subordinate, holding a little boy, Dan. The woman had said, "Teacher, look at this. No matter what I do to this boy, he doesn't move at all." The heroine turned to Julian and said, first of all, he was not an it, and second, he had a name. The girl replied that he really seemed dead and asked if she should throw him away, but the teacher firmly said no, and told her never to speak of throwing a person away as if they were some useless object. Then the heroine told Julian that she was old enough to understand, and asked her to take care of Dan. This child suffered from a deep fear. When he did rarely fall asleep, he looked almost dead, only because he usually couldn't sleep at all. At that time, the heroine took him in her arms and gently stroked his head. And now, just like back then, she was holding his head close and softly caressing his hair. After a while, the boy began to open his eyes, slowly waking up. When he finally came to, he looked at the girl before him and asked in surprise, "Teacher, is that really you?" The heroine panicked and didn't know what to do. After a moment's hesitation, she grabbed her hat and put it on his head so he wouldn't see what was happening. A few seconds later, the boy stood up, trying to see who it was, but she was already gone. The girl had quietly moved to another spot and covered herself with a piece of cloth. Just then, the kidnappers noticed that the boy had woken up. One of them told the fake Lord Dan that the man had regained consciousness. The imposter replied that he shouldn't just stand there like a statue. Go and tie him up. Hearing all this, the heroine grew anxious. She realized that the people standing before Dan were imposters pretending to be him and his order. She wondered what he would do next. But when the gang member approached, Dan didn't resist. He calmly allowed himself to be tied up. He just sat there quietly, doing absolutely nothing. The heroine thought he must be an idiot. She couldn't understand why her student would let himself be captured so easily. Did he really not understand what was going on? Or was he simply waiting for the right moment to act? As she pondered this, Lord Monty was informed that everything was ready. He nodded and said that was excellent. They could move out. Soon, all the kidnapped people were sitting in a carriage guarded by the gang members. The heroine could only think about one thing. Her hat had been left behind. After some time, they arrived at a forest. Everyone got out of the carriage and followed the captors deeper inside. After walking for a while, they came upon a large cave. The girl thought to herself how strange it was. Who would have imagined there was such a place in Avon? When they reached the entrance, the gang members announced that they had arrived and ordered everyone to go inside. One by one, the captives entered the cave. The heroine watched her student's back and wondered what he was planning to do next. Then they all descended and started moving through the corridor below. There were barred cells, and behind them sat other captives. Suddenly, an announcement echoed through the prison. Lord Monty had arrived. His subordinates immediately greeted him upon his arrival. The heroine carefully observed her surroundings, wondering what kind of place this was. Behind the bars, she saw people begging for mercy. She realized this was a massive underground prison. She had thought they were just a small criminal group imitating the order. But if their operations in Avon had grown this large, that was a serious problem. Then one of the gang members ordered the hostages to be divided into groups. Arya thought that if this was true, then there must be a much more powerful figure behind all of this. Suddenly, one of the prisoners called out to Lord Dan Monty, tears in his eyes, begging to be released. He said his sick child was waiting at home and that the boy had no one else. The man coldly told him to shut his mouth. Whether the boy lived or died was not his concern. Then he said the prisoner should hide in the farthest corner of the cell and stay quiet, but the man refused to give up. He reached his hands through the bars and grabbed Dan, still pleading for mercy. The fake Dan scowled and asked if he'd lost his mind. He'd already told him to be silent. The heroine thought this man was truly vile. The prisoner continued begging, explaining that he had just managed to gather enough money for his child's medicine, and if he didn't deliver it soon, the boy, only 5 years old, would die. He wept, pleading for them to let him go home to his son. Meanwhile, the heroine kept her eyes fixed on Dan, wondering what he was planning to do. The false Dan snapped that he'd had enough of the man's whining and ordered his subordinates to open the cell. Then he told the prisoner to step out. The man, overjoyed, thanked him repeatedly. But the fake Dan suddenly struck him in the face with his weapon and said he had told him to shut up and stay in his cell. And now it was his own fault for disobeying. Grabbing the man by the collar, he growled that spineless worms like him only obey when they're writhing in pain. Then he sneered, asking if the man really thought he'd be set free because of his pathetic sob story. He added that perhaps it was time to remind him who he was dealing with. The heroine could barely contain herself, thinking that if her student didn't act soon, she might lose control. The fake leader then raised his voice and told everyone to listen carefully. He declared himself Dan Monty of the Black Moon Order. At that moment, the real Dan suddenly laughed, interrupting him. The imposter turned furiously toward him, demanding to know how he dared laugh at a time like this. Everyone, subordinates and the heroine alike, looked on in astonishment. Dan continued to laugh, apologizing and saying it was his fault, but it was just too absurdly funny for him to hold back. He laughed even harder, lifting his head and raising his hands. Then, using his powerful magic, he shattered his restraints. The chains clattered to the ground. The fake leader stared in disbelief, exclaiming that those shackles were made of refined steel. How was this possible? The real Dan demanded to know who had given them permission to commit crimes in his organization's name. His captor was terrified, unable to understand what was happening. Dan then summoned magical chains, binding the man completely. The imposter's body was wrapped in energy so tightly that he couldn't even move or speak. Dan remarked that even though they had been reckless, no one had managed to track them down. Until now. He then asked who was really behind all of this, who had ordered them to carry out these crimes. The man tried to mumble something, but his mouth was sealed. Dan told him to speak clearly so he could hear him. The heroine watched intently as the scene unfolded. The fake leader's subordinates were confused and frightened for their master. Dan leaned closer to his captive and asked if he could hear him, then reminded him of his own words. Didn't he say that weaklings only obey when they're writhing in pain? Then he turned to the same prisoner who had begged earlier and asked if he wanted to hit this man. The prisoner hesitated, not understanding what he meant, but Dan told him to strike him back for what he had done. The terrified prisoner shouted that he didn't want to. He couldn't. Meanwhile, the restrained imposter began channeling magic to free himself from Dan's spell. A moment later, he succeeded and broke free, shouting at his subordinates, demanding if they were completely useless. He pointed at Dan and ordered them to move and capture him at once, but his subordinates replied that their bodies wouldn't move. They were frozen in place. Indeed, Dan had bound them all to the ground with his magic. Before anyone could react, the real members of the Black Moon appeared. Their true leader stepped forward and sneered, asking if these fools really thought they could impersonate such a powerful order, especially when they had neither the strength nor the skills to match it. He added that it figured, this wasn't Mariel after all, so how could such a great order possibly exist here? His subordinate asked what they should do with the others. The leader replied that they would capture them all, since this was clearly their only hideout. The real Dan grabbed the fake one again and demanded to know who had ordered the entire operation. The imposters were quickly captured by the real Black Moon members. One of them asked in shock if these people were truly the Black Moon, but then thought, that can't be right. Meanwhile, Dan pressed the man for answers, reminding him that he himself had claimed to be Dan Monty. Fine, Dan said coldly. Then tell me, who's really behind you? The man stammered that he had only followed orders. Dan demanded to know whose orders. Meanwhile, the true Black Moon leader's eyes were fixed on the heroine, studying her carefully. The girl tried to avoid his gaze, unwilling to reveal her true identity. The real leader said they had been told they could operate freely here without interference. Dan ordered the man to finally say who had told him that. The one staring at the heroine smiled slightly and said, "So, we meet again, young miss?" Then he added softly that she should allow him to help her. Meanwhile, Dan continued pressing his captive, telling him to stop mumbling. His nonsense was getting irritating. The man looking at the heroine asked if she had been kidnapped again, and if this was becoming some kind of hobby for her. She retorted that it wasn't like that. It had just happened by chance. At that moment, the imposter leader's body began to swell with magical energy. Everyone turned toward him. Suddenly, he spoke in a strange, distorted voice, addressing Dan directly. He declared that Dan Monty was the third disciple of Charlotte Eleanor and asked where his master was. He said he had spilled her blood on the earth in an attempt to resurrect her in this world, but he could not find her anywhere. Everyone in the chamber was horrified. One of them whispered, asking what was happening. The man's speech grew garbled and slurred, and people began to realize he was chanting a spell. The main heroine knew what was happening because she had met someone who spoke that language before. At that moment, she was shocked and realized it was the demonic language. The man grabbed Dan and asked if she had really died. In the end, even the woman who didn't seem human turned out to be mortal. He was glad that Charlotte Eleanor was truly dead. That being rejoiced that the vile mage had perished. He kept repeating how happy he was that the dreadful archmage was gone. Dan, in turn, told him to shut his filthy mouth. The subordinates of the heroine's disciple didn't understand what those strange sounds were that were ringing painfully in their heads. The girl immediately realized what she had to do and rushed toward them. Then she snatched a weapon from one of the men and ran toward Dan. With great force, she hurled the weapon at the scepter held by the man possessed by the demon. She did this to break the contact with demonic energy. The moment that conduit was destroyed, the man finally came to his senses. He stood still, not understanding what had just happened. Suddenly, he saw Dan in front of him, his eyes blazing with cold fury. The man grew terrified and stepped back, trembling, saying that he would tell him everything right away. At that moment, everyone present felt an enormous surge of magic. The leader of the Dark Moon Syndicate realized that things were going badly. Even the heroine sensed that Dan's mana had become completely unstable. The subordinates shouted that this was madness and that everyone needed to get out immediately. The young man told the heroine she had to leave. The girl instantly headed toward the exit. But before they could escape, a massive wave of mana burst out from the heroine's disciple. It was so powerful that everyone around was thrown in different directions, and the iron bars before him bent instantly. Panic erupted in the chamber as people wondered what was happening. It became clear that the mage's overwhelming power would cause everything to collapse. Everyone needed to flee as quickly as possible. The leader of the Dark Moon Gang stood beside the heroine. He said that he understood she was a special girl, but asked if she really wanted to die here. He urged her to move to safety right away. Then he added that her curiosity would be the death of her, so she needed to leave immediately. The girl told him to step back and take everyone with him as discreetly as possible. She added that, while escaping, he shouldn't forget to take all those scum with him. Her expression was resolute. She was preparing to act. She told her companion that she would stay behind just a little longer. The man was shocked to hear such words. Regaining his composure, he grabbed her by the clothes and asked if she had lost her mind. The heroine replied that, of course she hadn't. She would explain everything later. The man noted that she clearly didn't understand the situation she was in. He begged the young miss to listen carefully. There was nothing she could do to help in this situation. He told her to look ahead. After all, what could she possibly do against a Sixth Circle archmage who had lost control of himself? He didn't know why their leader had fallen into such a state, but now no one could stop him. So, if she valued her life, he implored her to run as far away as possible. Suddenly, the heroine asked what he expected her to do. Abandon that scoundrel to his fate? Her companion urged her to listen, saying that all they could do now was wait for him to regain control and calm down. He insisted she stop being stubborn and leave. The girl told him to let go of her right now, or she'd punch him. Meanwhile, Dan stood motionless as waves of energy kept erupting violently from his body. The leader of the Dark Moon Gang said it seemed their eyes had just met. He added that he would now count to 3 and the girl should run away. If he were to die, he asked her to pray for the repose of his soul. The heroine replied that he should stop talking nonsense. He had already annoyed her enough. At that moment, Dan came very close to the boy and tried to touch him with his hand. As a result, a massive explosion occurred and an enormous burst of magical energy erupted. The boy was terrified and immediately stepped back. Then he saw the heroine grab the boy's hand, and he stopped. The floor in the room was also split into several parts by an immense force. The red-haired boy immediately turned to Miss Misunderstanding and asked what she was doing. The heroine told him to stop shouting and breathe calmly. It turned out that the boy standing in front of him was extremely sensitive to mana, so he shouldn't use any magic. That's why they needed to leave. She instructed him to move very slowly and quietly so that the child could calm down. Meanwhile, the girl watched the boy in front of her attentively. At that moment, the heroine remembered that something similar had already happened before in her life. Back then, Lady Eleanor had been called over and told to come closer. A mage said that he had been eagerly waiting for the day he could finally meet her. But before he could finish speaking, the heroine silenced him with her magic, saying he was too loud. Then she turned to her subordinates and ordered them to report the entire situation to her. Suddenly, a woman began to cry and confessed to the heroine that everything that had happened was her fault. She had committed a great sin. The blood of demons flowed through that child's veins. The woman added that she had known all along she should have gotten rid of the boy right away. Now he had turned into a terrible demon thirsting for blood and the flesh of humans. She said it would have been better if the boy had never been born at all. With deep regret, she begged the heroine to take pity on her and kill the child. The heroine coldly replied that in this world there are no children who should not have been born. Then she asked the woman if she couldn't see that the child was sitting there crying. Indeed, the boy was sitting among the ruins, weeping bitterly. And now, the heroine stood before the boy and saw no life in his eyes. It seemed to her that her student was about to explode. Since he had grown up, nothing like this had ever happened before. And she couldn't understand if he was truly suffering that much. She realized she didn't know whether she could calm him down in this state. But if she failed, she would have no other choice but to act. Suddenly, the student came close to the heroine and grabbed her by the neck. Everyone around them was terrified, but the heroine grabbed his clothes in return and called out to Dan. In that moment, she wished deeply that her student would remember her. She recalled the time when the boy had lost control of himself. Back then, she had approached him and said that she'd been told his name was Dan, a boy born with great power. People had shouted for Lady Eleanor not to go near him since they hadn't yet assessed the situation, but she ignored their warnings and simply walked forward. She told the boy that she could see he was not yet ready to control such tremendous power. She then asked if it hadn't been hard for him to bear all of this. That's why, until his body and mind became strong, she asked him to let her support him and help him in everything, because near her, he would no longer suffer. By her side, his heart would be at peace and he wouldn't have to fear his own strength. At that moment, she used her magic to lift the boy up and draw him closer. When he came very close, she touched him gently with her finger. Then she cast a magic spell, and the boy's energy slowly began to subside. After that, she said that he would be safe with her because she was 1,000,000 times stronger than him. That's why she could stop any of his attacks. And he would have no reason left to cry. So it turns out that he will never hurt anyone again. Then she added that he should remember this voice and this warmth well. At that moment, the girl hugged the crying boy tightly to calm him down. Now the heroine was once again standing in front of her student, trying to stop him. She thought that if her seal from their first meeting was still within him, maybe it could work. After a while, the heroine wondered if it had worked. The boy began to look more like himself again and immediately grabbed the girl's hand. Right after that, he began sniffing her intently. His subordinates wondered what was going on and what their leader was doing. A moment later, the boy leaned closer and continued to sniff her even more intensely. The girl thought he resembled a big dog. Meanwhile, his subordinates were once again shocked, trying to understand what was happening. The tunnel where they were standing suddenly began to collapse. The members of the Dark Moon group wondered what was happening. Someone said it looked like the tunnel was falling apart because of a shockwave. The group's leader, asked if everyone had already gotten out. He was told that only they were left. At that moment, the heroine ran between them. The boy shouted to her immediately. She replied that she had asked him to stop shouting. He asked how he was supposed to stay quiet in this situation, and she reminded him not to use magic. A moment later, Gilhart turned and saw his leader. Dan was slowly walking toward them, still with a menacing look and a huge amount of mana radiating from his body. The man's subordinates were terrified. One of them asked why he was so angry. Suddenly, the heroine spoke to Dan, saying that everything was fine because she was by his side. She thought that if she could reach him now, she might be able to calm him down using the mana she still had left. The cave began collapsing even harder, and a terrible rumble echoed around. The heroine called out to her student, referring to him as her child, and motioned for him to come closer. The man's subordinates were shocked and asked if she had lost her mind. Their leader, puzzled, asked what child she was talking about. He couldn't understand who she could possibly be referring to. At that moment, Dan walked past them. He was actually obeying the girl's command. The heroine praised him and kept coaxing him to leave the cave. Gilhart and the others were once again stunned. The man immediately asked what was going on and who this girl really was. Then Dan came very close to the heroine, his full attention fixed solely on her. The girl thought that despite all the noise, her student's focus was entirely on her. She also realized that the seal wasn't completely broken yet. Suddenly, the heroine called out to Gilhart. He asked what she wanted. She told him that she could now use her magic and asked him to check if anyone was left, then to get out of there quickly. She also added that they should check that man and take him with them. The subordinates asked if he was still alive. A moment later, the girl turned to the other members of the group who were in the room. They immediately began listening to her carefully. She told them that once they got out, they should create a magical barrier at the cave entrance. She thought a 2-phase phase-on spell would be enough. When they reached their limit, they would need to maintain the spell's power at the 4th level. To prevent the blast wave from escaping outside, they should use more of their magic. Then she asked if they could handle it or not. Those same people looked at the girl in confusion and asked their leader what to do. He told them to follow her orders. It seemed that both of them should leave first. At that moment, those very people teleported out urgently. Gilhart stood there deep in thought. He realized that even in the Morel line, many mages knew about the Faison spell, yet this girl described its use in such detail. After his reflection, he asked what Miss planned to do. The heroine replied that she would stay a little longer. She could still see their leader, so there was no need to worry. They should leave. The man tried to protest. She told him they would follow right after, so they should go ahead. He said he understood and asked them not to delay and to get out immediately. The structure continued collapsing more and more violently. After some time, the group's leader managed to evacuate everyone except the man pretending to be the false Dan. He thought he was the last one left and wondered if the girl and his real leader would be all right. When that man left, only the main heroine and her student remained. They stood in the middle of the cave as everything around them crumbled. At that moment, Arya took the boy's hand and spoke to Dan. She told him that when a mage performs their final act, the soul stored in their mana fills the world, and that the same would likely happen to her. She thought that he probably wouldn't remember everything she was saying now, but she hoped his subconscious would keep it, and that this knowledge would make him stronger. Then the heroine said that everything has a beginning and an end. Every life is filled with meetings and partings. These experiences leave behind precious memories, and she wished to remain just that, a precious memory in his life. Even if she wouldn't be by his side anymore, the boy should know that he would be fine, because he was no longer a little child. By now, he had already learned and mastered so much on his own. Even when she would no longer be there, he would still have many good people beside him. That was why she said he would always be all right. Now he had become a very powerful mage, and because of that, he no longer needed his teacher. At that moment, the boy took her hand in his. Tears welled up in his eyes as he whispered that he still needed her. He added that it was because he really wasn't fine at all. The girl could hardly believe her eyes or his words, completely focused on the moment. The student slowly leaned closer and collapsed into her arms. The girl hugged him tightly and thought, "Oh, this child of mine." Then she said that he was such a foolish child. At that instant, a loud rumble echoed through the collapsing cave as the structure crumbled even faster. Bensiu. Moments later, the entire cave caved in completely. Those outside watched in horror. The leader of the Dark Moon group asked if the tunnel had truly collapsed. His subordinates confirmed that it had. The man was stunned and asked why they hadn't come out. Meanwhile, the two people the girl had instructed to cast the spell were doing exactly that. One of them said their leader had definitely survived, but they didn't know what had happened to the girl. Another subordinate added that she seemed to be a mage too. Gilhart exclaimed that she indeed was, and a very powerful one at that, in his opinion. As they spoke, a magical light appeared before them. A moment later, the main heroine appeared, supporting Dan by her side. Everyone was shocked and rushed toward them in concern. Someone asked if their leader had fainted or just fallen asleep. At the same time, a mysterious stranger, the one the girl had met recently, was watching the scene from afar, hidden in the shadows. Sometime later, Dan had a strange dream. In it, he arrived at a place where their teacher once had been. He wasn't alone. Other students and girls were there. One of them cried and said this was the last place where their teacher had been. It seemed that here all traces of the teacher and her mana had disappeared. Another student nearby asked why their teacher had chosen to come to such a cold and lonely place. Dan looked around carefully and thought he didn't want this. He tried to shake off that feeling, determined that he must find his teacher. Suddenly, a dark, mysterious silhouette appeared before him and said, "Charlotte Eleanor is dead." Then it stepped closer and added that he would never see his teacher again. He suddenly felt someone's touch from the other side. Turning, he saw a woman resembling his teacher calling his name. The boy woke up in terror. He realized it had just been a nightmare, one that felt far too real. Then he overheard his subordinates talking. One said their leader hadn't slept this long in ages. Another replied it was because he'd lost consciousness this time. Dan was lying in bed, completely restrained with chains. One subordinate asked if it wasn't too much. The other said it was necessary. Just one movement from their leader could turn the entire room into dust, so it was better to be safe. Suddenly, Gilhart entered the room and asked if they were still there. Then he added that their leader wasn't some zoo animal, so they should stop coming to gawk at him. He told them to let their leader rest, but at that very moment the chains snapped and flew past him. He turned to the bed and saw that it had happened to the leader. Meanwhile, the heroine was already back home. Her friend Judith asked Arya what she had been doing alone all day yesterday. Another friend said he was curious too. The butler mentioned that when she came home, she was covered in dust and dirt and looked unwell. Hearing that, her friend grew even more curious and asked what had happened. The heroine replied that she had something to tell them. She turned to Judith and Jerome and said they should stay away from her for a while. At that moment, she set her teacup down on the table. Then she thought that something was happening, something she didn't understand. Yesterday, she had only been thinking about what had happened in the cave, when that man had been taken over by a demon, and now she realized she couldn't expose these carefree children to danger. Still, first she needed to figure everything out, and only after gathering enough information should she act. After all, what if she'd misheard and her friend had actually said she didn't want any of this? Judith sat with tears in her eyes and asked where such thoughts even came from. She wondered if the girl didn't like the capital and wanted to go back home. At that moment, Jerome also turned to Arya. He noted that ever since they had moved to the capital, something rather strange had been happening to her. It seemed like she was constantly lost in thought. So he asked if something was bothering her, because if she didn't tell them, they would just keep worrying about her. Just then, the butler burst into the room where they were. He immediately addressed Milady and said she had to come outside and see it with her own eyes. In front of the building they were in, a crowd had gathered. It all happened because a carriage had arrived there, and a huge number of people had appeared. When the heroine and her companion stepped outside, they saw before them their companion, Geoffrey. The girl and her friends hadn't expected to see him there, so they were stunned. The Archduke smiled and whispered to the heroine that he had come to take her with him. Then he grabbed the girl and quickly pulled her into his carriage. The heroine, shocked, turned to Luster and asked if he'd lost his mind. She couldn't understand what kind of spectacle he was putting on. The man then addressed Lottie and asked if she was still angry with him. The girl told him to stop all this nonsense and also asked why he had brought all those knights with him. He replied that they needed to see it for themselves. The girl asked whom he was talking about. Geoffrey smiled and replied that he was talking about everyone. After that, he told Lottie to listen to him. Apparently, he'd run into a bit of trouble and had come to her first to explain everything. The heroine asked, "So what? Am I supposed to praise you for that?" The Archduke immediately said that he would be deeply grateful if she did, but the heroine told him she didn't have time for his jokes right now. That was because she felt they had serious problems. It seemed to her that the demons, the pursuers of the Doom Order, had returned once again. Hearing that, her companion was deeply shocked and immediately asked if she had any proof. Then, after a pause, he asked whether this might have something to do with the cave collapse and event. Then the man handed his outer coat to the girl. The heroine remarked that, as she suspected, he knew everything. The people involved in the incident had already been captured by the Black Moon Order, so they needed to investigate. Then the girl said there was something else she wanted to ask. Why had he sent someone to spy on her? Geoffrey asked in surprise what person she was talking about. The girl asked if he truly hadn't sent anyone. The man replied that if he ever did such a thing, he wouldn't trust it to anyone but himself. At that moment, the heroine sank into her memories. She thought that if Geoffrey hadn't sent that person, then who was it? She then decided that next time she would have to catch him. No matter how insignificant the matter seemed, she couldn't just let it go anymore. After that, the girl asked whether it was already noon. Her companion asked what she meant by that. The girl replied that she simply had a meeting scheduled for that time. Somewhere in the same city, 3 people were sitting together. They were members of the Dark Moon organization. Gilhard sat there, recalling the words the girl had told him. Before leaving, she had said that when their leader awoke, they should tell him that she would be waiting for him tomorrow at the Nest of Wings on Blue Square. Now they were sitting on the roof of a nearby building. The young man noted that she had asked them to deliver a message to their leader, but she hadn't said anything about them being unable to accompany him. The subordinates asked, "What about the leader?" But he replied that the leader had never cared whether they followed him or not. Then the man stood up and said that their leader probably didn't even know they were here. After all, ever since his awakening, he had not been himself at all. Dan, meanwhile, sat at that very place, dressed in a white tuxedo. He was deep in thought, recalling the girl he had met the day before. But those memories were blurry. The power that had burst out that day had affected his mind, and he could barely remember anything. At that time, the heroine was still sitting in the carriage, speaking with her friend Geoffrey. She told him that, in any other case, he shouldn't meddle in her affairs. Instead, he should return home. The man asked if she really intended to meet with her disciple. She replied that they had already met once before. Geoffrey, surprised, asked how that could be. Had they really met before? He asked if he hadn't recognized her. The girl told him that they met face to face for the first time yesterday, but because of the explosion, he probably couldn't remember anything. The Archduke immediately grabbed her hand. He asked in surprise what explosion she was talking about. Then he asked if she meant yesterday's destruction caused by Dan Monty's mana explosion. After that, Jeffrey asked Lottie if she had really used magic yesterday, and how much mana she had used. At that moment, the heroine took off the man's coat and threw it at him, saying that she knew better than anyone the condition of her own body. She also told him that he should be worrying not about her, but about the Doom Order group. Her companion asked whether, if he were to expose her, she would reveal herself to the other disciples as well. After all, it had taken him just one glance to recognize her. The heroine remarked that it truly had been him. No matter what form she took, he would always recognize her. The man was left speechless. In that moment, the girl thought to herself that, of course, it made sense. The most powerful swordmaster on the continent had to be this perceptive and sensitive to mana. After all, mana was proof of a mage's life force. The heroine knew that even if her disciples recognized her, they would never be able to confirm their suspicions. That was because her mana now was so weak and unstable that it couldn't even be compared to what she had possessed in her previous life. The heroine was about to leave but then stopped and turned back to Jeffrey. She reminded him that he had come to tell her about some problem. The man looked at her and said that it was just a small issue. Then he looked at her intently and said that it concerned her first disciple. The heroine was surprised and asked if he meant Carcillion. He nodded and said yes. He was talking about the Emperor of Marvel. Apparently, he had decided to declare war on Klaus. Hearing those words, the heroine froze in utter shock. At that same time, her first disciple, Carcillion, was in his palace. With a smile, he told his subordinates that on such a beautiful sunny day, his master always used to say, "Isn't this the perfect weather for a falling meteor?" The heroine, deeply troubled, wandered through the city streets. She thought about her long life and how many times she had been forced to make difficult choices. She believed that, in most cases, she had chosen the right path. At that moment, she entered the very place where her disciple was supposed to be waiting for her. When she walked in, she saw the young man sitting alone at a table. The girl wondered whether, when she had faced her death, she had truly made the right decision. The moment the young man saw her, he immediately ran toward her, throwing himself into her arms and hugging her tightly. After a short while, the heroine looked at her disciple carefully and began to think again. For some reason, she felt that she still hadn't thought everything through. That was why she knew she needed to act even more carefully. After a moment, she turned to Dan Monty, reached out her hand, and said that she was very pleased to meet him. The girl understood that she couldn't reveal her true name, Charlotte Eleonore, to him yet. That's why she introduced herself as Arya Lyson. The young man paused for a moment, then reached out his hand and shook hers, saying his name was Dan Monty. A moment later, they sat down at the table, quietly studying each other. The young man's gaze was so intense that the girl thought he might burn a hole through her with it. To ease the tension, she remarked that there were so many people on the first floor, yet no one here. The disciple replied that it was because he had asked everyone to leave. Hearing that, the heroine began to wonder when exactly he had arrived here. Then she told him she understood he must have many questions for her, but something else was bothering her. She asked how long he planned to keep holding her hands like that. Dan replied that he was just afraid she would run away from him. She said she would never do that, and asked whether he remembered what had happened yesterday. The disciple said he didn't, that the details were still unclear to him, but through those hazy memories, he asked if it had been her who saved him then. The girl said it wasn't exactly that she had saved him. She didn't even have a time to finish speaking before suddenly jumping to her feet. She looked out the window and began scanning the people outside, her gaze fixed on a man who stood out from the crowd, the same mysterious stranger she had seen recently, the one who had been watching her all this time. Their eyes met, and the man immediately turned away to flee. The girl kept her eyes on him, stunned. Then the heroine turned to her disciple. He asked if she was planning to catch that man. She replied that he should be the one to catch her instead. The young man agreed instantly and seemed almost delighted. Then the girl realized she had addressed him informally. You, instead of sir. She wanted to apologize for forgetting her manners again, but at that very moment, the young man used his magic and vanished. She thought to herself that the slip of the tongue had just come out naturally. Then she was tormented by thoughts of what had just happened. Just moments ago, she had felt an incredibly powerful presence, one that seemed to scream that this person was here. At that moment, she realized it had been a very long time since she'd felt something like that. She remembered her previous life and the days when she had fought demons. But a moment later, she brushed those thoughts aside, wondering what on earth she was thinking. If it had truly been related to the Doom Order, she would have known immediately. She decided that if she managed to catch that man, she would find out for sure. The mysterious stranger was calmly walking through the crowded city streets. In an instant, Dan appeared behind him, using his spatial magic. The moment he appeared, he called out to the man ahead to stop, and then reached for him, but the stranger dodged. The subordinates of the heroine's disciple were closely observing the scene. Their leader ordered them to keep an eye on the girl instead of wasting time eating, and they immediately headed toward Dan. He added that if they encountered the city guards, they must avoid escalating the situation. The subordinates assured him they would follow his orders. Meanwhile, the leader of the Dark Moon group wondered what was going on. He couldn't understand what their leader was after. Then he turned his gaze toward the girl Dan had been talking to. The moment he looked toward the building she was in, he saw an open window and the girl standing on the rooftop. The heroine stood there calmly, tying up her hair with a piece of cloth. She thought that she would first settle the matter with Dan and then head to Marvel to meet another of her disciples, Carcillion. The girl reflected that she didn't know how things had turned out this way, but her peaceful life seemed to have come to an end. She just couldn't shake off the strange feeling inside her. Then she blew a magical kiss, which floated up like a bird. Suddenly, the leader of the Dark Moon group appeared beside her on the rooftop. He immediately asked what had happened and what she was doing there. The heroine hadn't expected to see him at all and asked whether he had been following her. At that same time, Archduke Geoffrey was traveling in his carriage. Suddenly, he opened the window and ordered his subordinates to stop. One of them asked what was wrong. The man replied that something strange seemed to be happening in the city. The subordinate told His Excellency that, no matter what was going on, he still needed to continue on his way, reminding him how many times he had gotten in trouble for acting on impulse. But before he could even finish speaking, his superior suddenly leapt out of the carriage at incredible speed and dashed off in another direction. Another subordinate, seeing this, sighed that it looked like they wouldn't be reaching the Imperial Palace today, and added that their commander was unbelievably fast. Meanwhile, the heroine's disciple and the mysterious stranger were facing each other in the middle of a city square. Their confrontation startled the bystanders, who began wondering if a fight was about to break out. Dan told his opponent not to waste his strength pointlessly, that it would be better to surrender peacefully. The stranger said nothing, remaining completely silent. Dan asked again why the man had been watching them, clearly with hostility. After a short silence, Dan realized that the stranger wasn't going to answer. At that moment, he used his spatial magic to attack. He moved swiftly, but the mysterious man managed to dodge the strike. After evading, the stranger tried to flee in another direction, but the heroine's disciple wasn't about to let him escape. He immediately launched another wave of magic after him. A huge explosion followed, and a wall of dust rose into the air. Dan advanced toward it, remarking that the guy was pretty strange. He added that if the man really wanted to run, he should have chosen a better strategy. Dan also noted that his opponent clearly wasn't trying to fight back. He concluded that the man must be a mage, though judging by the odd aura around him, his magic didn't seem to function normally. Dan then demanded to know who he was, but before the man could reply, Dan said it didn't really matter, and summoned magical chains to bind his opponent. Suddenly, the mysterious stranger chanted a spell, and dark spots appeared around him. That dark power began to spread rapidly, enveloping the area. The heroine's disciple looked on, trying to understand what it was, then quickly leapt back to avoid the shadowy substance. He stared forward, still confused, as his opponent broke free from the chains. Out of the dark mist emerged monstrous beasts with glowing red eyes. A moment later, all those creatures charged at Dan. His subordinates appeared in front of him, trying to defend their leader. One of the female subordinates asked what on earth those things were. Dan looked ahead and saw the mysterious man fleeing through the alleys. He told his subordinates to take care of the beasts. The dark creatures attacked indiscriminately, striking at anyone nearby. Just as one of them was about to attack helpless civilians, Dan appeared and used his magic to protect them. The people who had been saved began thanking him profusely, but the heroine's disciple ignored them, his eyes fixed on the escaping figure. At that same time, the leader of the Dark Moon group was speaking with the heroine. He admitted that, even though it might sound strange ever since what had happened yesterday, he hadn't been able to stop thinking about her. He said that, although he knew almost nothing about her, he felt that if he didn't tell her how he felt, he would regret it later. He then added that there was just one thing he wanted to ask her. He asked if she would like to become a new member of the Dark Moon group. But before he could finish, the heroine vanished from sight, having used spatial magic to escape. The magical bird she had released earlier was still flying high above the city. After a short while, it relayed the location of the mysterious stranger to her. Using spatial magic once again, the girl appeared beside him. in midair, flying toward him. The man saw her coming and immediately turned around. The instant he saw her, he spread his arms as if to catch her. Seeing this, the heroine was startled and had no intention of falling into his arms. Just before landing, she struck him in the head with her knee. She landed gracefully and stood up, saying that she didn't know what he was trying to do, but it was clear he hadn't been running away from her. It also seemed that he had already known she was nearby. The heroine demanded to know who had sent him and why he was following her, but the stranger remained silent, just staring at her. After a while, the girl said that her questions were probably pointless anyway. She added that he could summon and control darkness, meaning there was no use trying to hide what he was. Then she leapt at him with great speed to strike, saying that concealing his nature was meaningless. But the mysterious man effortlessly blocked her attack. He then grabbed her by the arm and shifted their positions. The heroine remarked that even after all these years, there were still people willing to follow doom. Then she asked what exactly he knew about her. She also asked whether he had any connection to what had happened yesterday. Though she didn't know how much he actually knew, she wondered aloud if he'd thought about sharing what he did know, since doing so might help her. At that moment, the heroine looked closely at his face and saw that the man had silvery hair. The mysterious stranger still said nothing and released her arm. Then he suddenly turned around and ran. The girl chased after him, shouting for him to stop. As she pursued, she realized that he looked strangely familiar, and thought, could it really be him? But a moment later, she dismissed the thought, reasoning that it was impossible for that person to be here. She kept chasing him, but suddenly stopped. Her vision began to blur. The heroine staggered, wondering why this was happening now. She saw the man stop and turn toward her. Confused, she clutched her head, saying that everything was spinning and her head hurt terribly. A moment later, she whispered that she was dying, and collapsed. The mysterious stranger froze, clearly shocked and worried, then rushed to her side to help. Taking advantage of his moment of confusion, the heroine sprang to her feet and unleashed her magic to bind him. The stranger's arms were wrapped in magical restraints as the girl leapt toward him, reaching out to touch his face and cast another spell. Meanwhile, one of Dan's subordinates approached him, reporting that they had taken control of the situation. Some buildings and roads had been damaged, but no one was seriously injured. Their leader acknowledged the report, saying they had done an excellent job. More genres are coming soon. Subscribe to unlock them all.